We have two people who know a lot about leading dialogues on provocative topics like polling, and that's Joseph Campbell and our own Spencer Kimball. Joseph has been a long friend of Emerson. He has been a big supporter of Spencer when people were saying, gee, they're using a lot of strange methodologies at Emerson, and Spencer is always testing new methodologies, which is why people look and support him so much with the new media. So what we'll do is they're going to give you an overview, and then we're going to have conversation and an opportunity for dialogue. So Spencer and Joseph, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, everybody. It's great to see you here. And Spencer, welcome back to DC. Good to see you in town.
Great to be sitting with you again, Doug.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. It's a fascinating time, of course. I don't have to tell you that. With the midterms, 5 days away, and the control of Congress at stake. And also for pollsters, this is an important test. It's a very crucial test for pollsters in general, for election pollsters overall. I mean, especially after polling had a couple of setbacks in presidential elections recently, 2016, 2020. I don't have to go into those details, but this is a time for pollsters to perhaps show their mettle and prove themselves again. So we'll see. And you know, keeping track of pre-election polls in this environment, in this season, has been really dizzying. Has anybody had the effect of like whiplash? Kind of keep track of the polls? Has anybody noticed that? Is this something that, do you want to describe it for me? What it feels like trying to keep track of these polls?
Well, it's overwhelming, and I defer to the resident expert in the home, because I sometimes need to take a break from it, because it's just like watching the stock market. I can't watch it every day. I can't watch these polls every day because I find it's physically stressful. Emotionally stressful. So that's, I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Yeah, I like the stock market analogy too. You know, with the 401ks in bad shape, I'm watching the market every day. Does somebody else want to talk about whiplash and polling? Yeah, way in the back there. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was a Spencer student, very involved in polling society, and one of the things I learned is that toss-ups and small margins of error, that it's so hard to understand what the likelihood is of any particular outcome, and it seems like that is more common now than ever, and in some ways it's like, you know, you just throw up your hand and say, oh, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, let's go vote already, kind of thing. And you know, whiplash is a real effect. It's pretty clear just this season in, say, New Hampshire, bordering Massachusetts. Is the Senate race there really tight? Does Maggie Hassan have a chance of losing, or is she ahead by 9 points? I mean, and in the Michigan governor's race, is Gretchen Whitmer ahead by 10, or is it, you know, is it much closer than that? So if you watch these polls real closely, in general, overall, you can get a severe case of polling whiplash, it seems to me. And polls are most valuable in a democratic society when they more or less estimate correctly the outcome of prominent elections. And the important verb there is estimate, because polls, yeah, they are kind of predictions, but I think they're best thought of as estimates, as to likely outcomes. And in recent years, an impressive record of polling success has been constructed by Emerson College Polling. 2 years ago, for example, when many public polls were signaling a blue wave for the Democrats, signaling a landslide for Joe Biden's presidential candidacy, Emerson College Polling saw a different, more modest outcome. It estimated that Biden was ahead at the end of the campaign by 5 percentage points. Biden won by 4.5. That's pretty much on target in the polling industry. It was a very impressive and very memorable outcome for Emerson College Polling. And this election season is no different. No polling organization has been more robust, more energetic, or as prolific as Emerson College Polling. So it is an increasingly prominent polling organization in the landscape of lots and lots and lots of pollsters, election pollsters in particular. And so it is really a tribute to Spencer Kimball's work over the past 10 years with Emerson College Polling. And it is my pleasure to more formally introduce Spencer Kimball, Professor Kimball, this morning. He established Emerson College Polling in 2012 as a place for innovative research. And I think the emphasis should be on innovative because, as Greg Payne mentioned, Spencer's work in polling methodology and coming up with different approaches to tapping data and getting responses from would-be voters is very, very impressive. The polling center allows students, too, first-hand experience in working with public opinion research and in pre-election polling. Spencer, it is good to have you back in DC. Good to see you here, and I look forward to hearing more about your most recent polling results. Not that they'll give us whiplash, but I always go to Emerson College first for some insights about where we stand. And so, speaking of whiplash, do you feel that too as a pollster? Do you feel that whiplash, or is that a little bit unfair in terms of characterizations or criticisms?
Well, generally, we try to stay focused on our polls. And so we're looking at trends, and then we're able to track that. The problem is when you're starting to look at all of these polls, that's where the whiplash happens because each pollster's got these different methodologies, and some polls can have somebody up by 16 and somebody by 2, and that's, to me, a polling error. You've got an outlier somewhere. But when you get these polls that are within 1 point on one side and 3 points on the other, that's all within the polling error. So those are okay, and that's what you have to keep an eye on to keep you from getting that whiplash. You're gonna have to count some outliers out there before, unless you have, selective exposure where you're like, hey, really like that candidate, so that's my poll. But with that, we do have an election day, which brings us to reality.
Indeed, yeah, that's the real poll, doesn't it?
Well, it's like I said, today I'm an expert, but on Thursday I have to come to Dr. Campbell's class, and I said I'm not gonna be so smart. So it's always fun as we look at the elections of what's going to happen. And then afterwards, not to be embarrassed by the results, but to learn from those results. And that's how you improve upon the methodology. Because as much as some people dislike polls, and Dr. Kimball here, if you're not aware, he wrote the book Lost in a Gallop and talks about all of the polling blunders throughout the 100 years of our discipline. And my goal is always not to be in his book. So you don't want, any of those stories. And but with that said, it is an exciting year because we do get to test new methodologies. And when I think about that, I ask you, how many of you have ever received like a text message and got for a poll in maybe the last 6 months? But 5 years ago, did you ever receive a text message to take a poll? No, because it was illegal. You couldn't do it. So technology changes, and the way we communicate changes, the way we collect that data needs to change. And so that's where our innovation comes from. We're collecting through text messages. We collect it through emails. Isabel Holloway is our programmer. Camille Mumford is our comms director. Eric Toller, our deputy director. And I call them out because you hear my name a lot. I'm the vessel who gets to produce their work. And so I want to make sure that they've been recognized for their achievements as well.
You guys have been very vigorous, before we look at this election season, 80 or more polls probably, by my count.
We enjoy the elections, and so honestly, we sit in the office and we're like, hey, what's going on in Oklahoma? I see a poll that's got this race in 1 point. Oklahoma's a 33-point Republican state. Can Stitt really lose? And then, we jump over to Oregon and we're saying, hey, there's a 3-way race there. Is Betsy Johnson going to hold 15% of the vote, or is that going to melt away like we saw in these polls that we'll be disclosing in a few moments? So it's always exciting. We really enjoy the electoral. We try to keep the partisan side out, and we just kind of watch the game, and then we go to the next election.
Which is the hardest race this election season to poll, for whatever reason? Maybe methodological, maybe the candidacies, maybe just the ebb and flow of the campaigns.
Well, as far as like response rates go, and I'm not a fan of like saying that a low response rate, people don't answer it, it doesn't mean it's a bad survey. But what we saw in Georgia were people not wanting to take surveys. And we came to the conclusion that they've been in an ongoing election process now for multiple years when we thought about it. Because, why is Georgia not answering our surveys? But they're answering it in Pennsylvania, they're answering it in Arizona. It just had a lower propensity. And so that's what, the ongoing election. And then I'm like, oh, the poor people of Georgia. If this goes to a runoff, more polling is coming their way. They're not going to get less. They keep going until December 6th. So, it's been a little bit of a challenge down there.
Is there a particular state that looks to you to be likely to be an upset, a race, a Senate race or a gubernatorial race that looks, or am I going to steal your thunder from data you're going to release in a moment or two?
No, we can talk shop. So, yeah, when I think about some upsets, like I don't see Ohio. So we've got a poll out in Ohio. J.D. Vance running against Tim Ryan. It's been a competitive race. But it looks like Ohio is shifting back. Remember, that's a +8 Trump state. DeWine is running up there, winning by 20 points in the governor's race. So there's no coattails for Ryan to really catch on to. And it looks like Vance will win that race. And that will actually, when we get inside base, we can get into the inside baseball of this. That's a win for Trump because Vance was a Trump candidate. And so there's going to be a little scoreboard on election night, the Trump candidates from the primaries and the non-Trump, and how they perform within the Republican Party, because as we're going to talk at 11:30 this morning with Elaine and Linda, 2024 is coming November 5th. I know, it's November 20 is coming right after November 8th, 2022. So a lot of excitement to look forward to there.
Do you have some insights about the race in Pennsylvania, Senate race in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so that race has been an interesting race. We've been tracking it for about 4 months. Well, you had the primaries in Pennsylvania, and those were very exciting because, you got John Fetterman, and you get Fetterman before the stroke and after in debates. So if you want to see what the difference is, go watch the debate before and during the primary, and watch how he presents his arguments. Then watch the debate during the general election, see how he presents his arguments. And when we did the poll question on the debate, the people who watched the debate, Fetterman's losing by about 12 points. People who didn't watch the debate, Fetterman's winning by about 20 points. So it's very interesting to see the impact of that debate, but Fetterman's numbers kind of have stayed. They're like at 47, 48, while Oz has been able to pick up over time. The attack that Oz is from New Jersey was good over the summer, but when things focused in, people said, it just doesn't seem to be that cutting up an issue. When we asked it a second time, it went from like really important to 50% down to like 40, and so that's more of a partisan, and you're going to switch over some independents. And so now we've got Oz up by a point, but what's interesting there is Shapiro, the governor candidate for the Democrats, Josh Shapiro, he's up like 10 points. So it's a very strange run in Pennsylvania, and the thought is that Shapiro should be able to pull Fetterman over the finish line, and we'll obviously have to wait to see what those results look like.
And we might have to wait several days until the Pennsylvania results are known.
But it's a really important point as we look at these elections. It's not just who votes, but how we count these votes. And so it's so frustrating to watch, like, knowing that they're counting day-of votes in a state, and they're like, whoa, look, the Republicans are up by 20 points, or they count the early vote, and the Democrat is up by 30 points, and you're like, wow, these are blowouts, the pollsters were terrible. And I'm like, let's count all of the votes. And by the time we count all of the votes, public opinion has already been made that the polls were off, and then we go, we try to figure out what happened at that point. But it's going to take a little while to count these votes because of the different ways. And it was frustrating in 2020, a little frustrating in 2021 to watch it, and I think that's going to continue in 22.
How about the New York governor's race? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a +23 state for the Democrats. And you would think, all right, Kathy Hochul didn't get elected, has to replace Cuomo up there, so she doesn't have that incumbency advantage. But we had her up 14 points over the summer. And in the summertime, the Biden approval had dropped a little bit. Anyways, we come back in the spring, and we had it down to in the fall, a couple weeks ago, I had it at 6. I'm like, whoa. I think we've finalized it around 8 or 9 points, which is, again, still 10, 14 points below where the Democrats should be. And to me, those are the trends you've got to keep an eye on. Pennsylvania is holding, but when you start seeing states giving up 10, 12 points to the Republicans, same thing happening in Illinois. Pritzker's going to win that race, but he's not going to win it by 22 points. He'll win it by 11 or 12. And so now you have to start thinking, what are these trends happening? And then what happens in some of these other races that have been closer, like Pennsylvania? Does that trend continue and you see Shapiro win by 5 or 6 and Oz win? Or does Shapiro pull it over to 10, 11 and Fetterman takes it by a point or 2? So a lot of exciting times to watch for.
There's a phenomenon called herding, and it's very difficult to prove, but it's widely suspected that the closer we get to an election, the more the polls across the board begin to look similar, the more that they kind of become very close to each other. Do you buy that theory, and is it sort of being borne out in this season?
Yeah, so I think the herding was a big issue in 2012. In 2012 was one of the best polling exercises in elections. They were very good. 2016, not so good. But 2012 was good. And so what happens is the other pollsters look to the main pollsters, and everyone hovers around those numbers, because nobody wants to be the outlier. And if we're the outlier, well, you know what? Then Emerson's the outlier, or Marquette's the outlier, or Maris is the outlier. So like, there's strength in numbers is the thought. But then after the 2016 sub-performance by the industry, I think the herding kind of like, dissipated, because they said, you know what? They're not perfect. You know, it's not gospel over here either. And so pollsters, I think, had a little bit more freedom to put out some more outliers, because it's tough to have an outlier. Nobody wants a poll that's off by 15 points. But in the methodology, 1 in 20 polls is going to be off by 15 points. We did 80 polls. I've got 4 outliers sitting there. And I don't know what it is, but you know, it's kind of like a box of chocolate. I just hope I don't get the coconut one. So we'll see. You know, obviously we don't know where that is, but that comes back to our methodology. Because we get to use these different modes of data collection, I can see within that data, hey, my landlines don't look right, or the cell phones don't look right, or my online component, you know, why is that young group voting for a Republican? That's not right. And so you can start to see if there's issues within the data set, as opposed to if you're only using one mode of data collection, it's hard to compare anything to see where errors could be.
You know, some polling organizations still do random digit dial telephone calling as their principal or only mode of polling. Not to ask you to criticize fellow pollsters, but what do you think of that sort of unimodal approach to election polling?
Well, as a professor and a teacher, we usually teach the way we've been taught. And so if we grew up in a classroom without technology, we're not maybe teaching with technology, or it's a new form for us. These pollsters learned on RDD, random digit dialing. They learned with live operators. And the idea of them changing their method, so Rick Barry shot a basketball underhand, okay, and was very successful at it. I'm not going to convince him to go shoot it overhand. These pollsters, they've got their methods, and you see it in the press, what they say. They're not interested in learning text to web. They're not interested in learning social media data collection. We're interested in all of this because while the elections are important, they are our canary in the coal mine, or as George Gallup would say, the acid test, but not here. They give us the insights of how to measure public opinion in the future, the year 2030, the year 2050. Yes, pre-election polls are awesome because we have the election to compare with. This is survey research. This is public opinion. Public opinion is going to be here. It's a $5–6 billion industry. So it's going to continue to grow, and what we're learning are the modes of data collection for that future. And so while we're excited for the election on Tuesday, we're excited for November 5th, 2024, we're also excited for the year 2030, because the communication is going to change, and so will our data collection. So it's always evolving, and I hope that we don't become that group that says, oh, we only do it this way, because that's how we learn.
Let's see if there are any questions or comments from the audience. And before we turn to the audience, let me ask you, do you think that the polling industry ever will find a gold standard, a new gold standard? It was at one time random digit dialing phones, the live operators. That was the gold standard for many years. It is no longer, quite clearly. Is there a new gold standard out there? It's probably not going to be text to web, is it?
Well, it could be, but the law could change like that with the new FCC chair, and now no more texting. And let me tell you, like I watched the Kansas debate, the governor's debate, and at the end of the debate, the candidate said, I have just one favor, or the moderator said to both candidates, I have one favor. Will you stop texting my wife? Because the candidates, the campaigns are texting constantly, and so we're getting all of these texts, and so the industry itself is self-regulating. So now you can't send out certain text messages. Political text is a little bit easier, but you know, that's how the industry goes, and you know, we'll see where it takes us.
So it could be, you think, the gold standard eventually?
So what we really wanted the gold standard to be was online polling. After 2012, the online polling did so well that SurveyMonkey created this brand with NBC, and they did 300 polls, because online polling is about 1/5 of the cost of live operator. So So SurveyMonkey was going to dominate the field with their online polls, and then we said 2016 was not a good year for polling. And so, if you notice, SurveyMonkey is changing their name, and because they had a bad season. And that was going to take us into online polling like YouGov, but we're not there now. And we're in this kind of a experimental period of what's going to come for public opinion
We
research.
certainly are, and you guys are at the forefront of this
We
experimentation.
try.
Do we have a quick question from the audience? We do want to have some dialogue with folks.
So that we could just sit here and talk.
We could. Yes, sir, real quickly.
I wanted to get your thoughts on the Alaska race that happened over the summer, because Mary Peltola won that seat that's been Republican for like half a century. So how difficult is that for you reaching voters in Alaska that don't have landlines or internet service or anything like that?
It's a little primitive, but no, Alaska's fine. We could poll Alaska. The biggest challenge in Alaska is they have ranked choice voting. So it's not as easy as just saying, hey, we're going to vote for Chewbacca or Murkowski. Those are the two candidates in the Senate race. So we're not going to go with those two, but like you get to rank all four of them. So we actually had that exercise in the New York mayor's race. It was the first time in New York that they have tried ranked choice voting, and none of the other pollsters would do it. So the local pollsters in New York, Siena, they're like, whoa, ranked choice voting, what is that? We said, opportunity. Let's go learn how this works. And so we jumped in there and we did the ranked choice voting in New York. So to be honest, that's going to be your major concern in polling in Alaska, is making sure that they're using the right methodology. It's not just a head-to-head race. They have to know how that vote's going to break out over time. That district was interesting because that's Don Young. It's not a district, it's a state. But Don Young's seat that he held forever, though under multiple ethics issues, but still was able to hold it. It'll be interesting to see if the Democrats can hold that seat compared, that's a primary, or a special election next to a general election. So the turnout model will be slightly different. And Alaska's more Republican. So you got to think that the Republicans would be looking to take that seat. But on the flip side, you got like the Texas 34th district that the Republicans took, and that's a seat that could flip back to the Democrats because of redistricting. It's not as red as it was. And even in New York, you've got Delgado's old district where the Democrats won that, but that's the old district that they won over the summer. Now they have to run in the new district. So that's one more little wrinkle we have in the election. It's redistricting. We have new congressional districts. So it's hard to just compare A to B because each state played their games to try to strengthen some and weaken others.
Do you have some new polling data we could
Sure.
discuss and share?
So we have the Ohio poll. We just did a North Carolina poll, and that's got Ted Budd and Sherry Beasley. Bud had,
Senate race.
This is the Senate race. Bud had been up like 7 points way early, back in April, May. Then Beasley cut into it, down to 4, down to 1. Now we got it back up to 5. It was almost as if the Democrats peaked right after Labor Day. For like a week or two, their numbers were very strong, and even Biden's favorability was like almost even in our poll. The ballot test, but then about 3 weeks later, it seems like the Republicans peaked maybe a little early themselves, maybe last week, and so their numbers were up. Now I feel like things are kind of plateauing where like New Hampshire, we've got a new poll out there. We had that race at 11 points at the start, it was down to 3 points, and now it's at 4. So like that's the Hassan Bulldog race. And so it looks like they've been able to hold off that. Same thing in New York, where we had Hochul up by 14, down by 6, and then it kind of stabilizes at 8. So it looks like the Democrats have been able to bounce back. Perhaps the most interesting one is out in Oregon. You might not be following this, but the Oregon governor's race is currently held by Katie Brown, who is term limited. And so you have Tina Kotek, the lieutenant governor. You have a Republican, you don't need to know all their names, and an independent. Okay? The independent used to be a Democrat, and she'd been polling the Democrats' vote, giving the Republican a chance to win. And the question about third-party candidates is how long they're going to stay relevant before their vote melts away. And so, as a pollster, you got to kind of stay in the field to the finish line because that vote's going to melt. When people realize their candidate's not going to win, generally speaking, they go to somebody else. And what we've noticed there is that they've gone back to the Democrats. So what looked to be a toss-up race the Democrats look to have a 3-4 point lead now, and so that's an opportunity for them to hold. So I think in the governor's races, the Democrats are going to do well. I think Jerry Polis in Colorado, I think Laura Kelly. So it's going to be interesting on that side. The House, I think, is going to flip over to the Republicans, and then the battle will be in the Senate, and that will be an exciting show in those, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, and Pennsylvania.
Yeah, fabulous, fantastic.
If we were in Europe, the participation is a key element in order to know what can be the results. I imagine also in US. What are the trends nowadays? Who would benefit of greater participation?
Well, the conventional wisdom is the Democrats benefit from greater participation. And we saw that kind of in those Georgia runoffs where you had over 4.5 million people voting and that they took those runoffs. So I think that would be their benefit. But now we got to ask, remember it's 50 states. So like that state, Georgia might have a huge turnout. But I don't think you're going to have a huge turnout in Florida, so that helps the Republicans. What about Arizona? They might have a huge turnout. That would help. So you got to look at this on a state-by-state basis and not as that national number. And it's a great question there. So, well, thank you, Dr. Campbell.
It's been my pleasure, thank you.
And as we walk off, I just want to let you know that what happened in 2021 was we were studying the California recall election. And during that recall election, we noticed a swing of the Hispanic vote. And so at this time, I'm going to call up Dr. Blanquerna and Isabel Holloway, and I'll give you a little insight into the unlocking of the Hispanic vote, and we'll look forward to their conversation.